Greetings and welcome to this light edition of an episode of Captain's Yacht, a Star Trek The Next Generation review series done by two inner-city high school teachers. The purpose of these light episodes is to demonstrate more intermediate levels of video editing and videography for students that have the basic understanding of how podcasting works and decide they want to expand on their knowledge. An added purpose of our light episodes is to break Scholar Beta's and my discussions of Star Trek The Next Generation from a 90-minute podcast episode into smaller, more manageable pieces for you, the YouTube audience. So let's beam aboard the Captain's Yacht and see what we're all talking about today.
Welcome, fans of Star Trek, to episode 2 of the Captain's Yacht, the podcast that takes you on a tour of Star Trek The Next Generation, episode by episode. Join us as we board the yacht for a 3-episode excursion this week into TNG Season 1, including Code of Honor, The Last Outpost, and Where No One Has Gone Before. My name is @ScholarBeta on all social media, and I am joined by my co-host,
Captain Kanaka. Good to see you all. E como mai, as they say in Hawaiian, and welcome.
Hey, let's do a quick recap. I'll get us started here of what we talked about last episode. I just want to remind the listeners that this podcast is put together by two teachers, and it's designed as an experiment in experiential learning. And my ultimate goal is to encourage my students to get out there and create without striving for perfection, without striving for, having all sorts of technical ability. No, I just want them to get out there and learn by doing. So, hey, this podcast is a model in that process, and I'm extremely excited to be joined by my co-host who's on this exploration with me.
And I, as a social studies teacher who has done some experimental, experiential learning too, I want to second everything that our resident scholar has said. I am very big on experiential learning, culturally responsive learning. Anything that does not involve reading directly from a book is definitely good for students. So I am absolutely thrilled to be on this adventure with you, Scholar Beta.
Hey, thank you. And I know we're just getting started on our adventure, but I want to propose another side quest really fast. And that is a special episode where we actually talk about all the pilots from the Roddenberry Berman era. We talked about what our favorite pilot was last time. I threw Emissary under the table, and then I started watching Deep Space Nine all last week, and I thought, okay, I want a special episode. We can sit down and talk about what works and what doesn't work about all these pilots, because they're all amazing. Caretaker's amazing. Encounter at Farpoint's amazing. There's a lot of good stuff out there. So, hey, I'm going to put that on the calendar for sometime late 2020, okay?
Awesome. I'd love to do that. So with that in mind, as we continue our recap here, here's a little section that in Hawaiian, the phrase "e kala mai" means "I'm sorry" in Hawaiian, which is when we fix a goof. During our talk about characters and who auditioned for whom, our resident scholar pointed out that Patrick Stewart was reading for Data, and the thought of him doing that was so outlandish and just did not compute in my head. I wasn't sure, and I casted doubt. And with that in mind, I wanted to clarify that Patrick Stewart did read for Data originally, as did another actor that we're going to be talking about in today's episode. And after doing further research for this, Patrick Stewart originally wasn't even in the top 3 to play Captain Picard. The front runner was Mitch Ryan, character actor who you might recognize as Dr. Wynn from Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
What a film. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yes. That psychiatrist was going to be Captain Picard originally. Edward James Olmos of Battlestar Galactica fame and one of my favorite movies, Stand and Deliver. He was considered for the role. It's probably good that he didn't get the role, because if Olmos had played Picard, he probably wouldn't be in Stand and Deliver, because Next Generation came out in '87 and Stand and Deliver came out in '88. And Scholar Beta, I think you have some praise for
Yeah,
Mr.
Edward James
Olmos.
almost. I just want to say that yeah, he is an amazing captain, and I think you could have done an amazing job here. But you should look at some production footage. Obviously, I know you've seen Stand and Deliver, but take a look at what Edward James almost looks like in '88 versus like the early aughts where he plays um, Admiral Adama or Captain Adama. Oops, sorry, a little spoiler there for folks who haven't seen Battlestar Galactica. But hey, Edward James Olmos, just want to give him a shout out. Incredible actor. Love Stand and Deliver as well. Never took that AP test, but I can definitely appreciate what he's doing in that film. I think there's
Definitely.
one other actor, right, that read for Picard that you want to mention?
Yes, there is. Yaphet Kotto, who you may remember if you are acquainted with the Alien universe. He played Parker, one of my favorite characters in that universe. I absolutely love Parker. And that is kind of works as a segue to our first conversation, which is
That's
if
right.
Kotto was playing Picard, this first episode we're reviewing would be changed completely in terms of subtext. So with that in mind, before we get into this, one little rule that we've added to keep us on schedule, we have a 30-minute timer, which means we're not just going to ramble on and on like we did for the first our pilot episode for
That's right. Yep.
2 hours. For those of you who are interested, we will produce lighter versions, which we break it down episode by episode. And this will be the prototype for that. So 30 minutes, and you will know when we're done, because we will literally be beamed out of the episode, courtesy of sound effects. So with that in mind, 30 minutes, engage. So we are talking Code of Honor, the infamous episode Code of Honor. My goodness. Now, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. And we're working on our sharing the mic as well for our dear viewers. I just was hoping you were going to start off by reading the start date too before you launch into behind the scene, to make it an official introduction to this episode.
Well, of course. So, for those of you who are interested, folks, there is a special code behind the star date. I don't know if our resident scholar is familiar with that. He says he is. So with that in mind, the star date is 41235.25. As a historian, it might be an interesting way to note that the way you break this down, if a star date starts with 4, it takes place in the 24th century originally. 1 deals with season 1. And then because there's about 24 episodes in a season, you look for the penultimate number to see where you are. So this is the 3rd episode technically, so it's 41235.25. So with that in mind, this script, folks, oh boy. In terms of our current climate right now, it's kind of strange, but you take a look at the original script, and it bears very little resemblance to the episode that we actually got. The original script was written to include reptilian aliens based on the samurai culture, completely indistinguishable from humans. That concept, I would bet money, was dropped because of budgetary reasons. That first season, rather. $3 million had to be cut, and I can guarantee you that the creature effects were cut there. The episode's director, Russ Mayberry, insisted on the actors playing the Lingonians be African American actors, which raised a lot of eyebrows, including Gene Roddenberry's. So much so that because of Mayberry's insensitive treatments of the subject matter, or rather the subtext, Gene Roddenberry actually fired Mayberry halfway through production, and the assistant director, Les Landau, was responsible for finishing the episode but wasn't credited. So In keeping
Wow.
with what we, yeah, in keeping with what we talked about last time, every episode starts with a little behind the scenes stuff, and this one's definitely something to write home about, folks, because this was really chaotic. So, with that in mind, our resident scholar is going to tell us the premise and tropes of this episode. So,
Yeah,
take it away.
absolutely. So the plan. So let's talk about what actually happens in this episode. I appreciate the behind the scenes. That gets me thinking a little bit about how those reptilian ant creatures in Lonely Among Us. I wonder if maybe those were a holdover from this episode. That'll be interesting to look at when we get there.
Yeah.
But what's going down in this episode, Captain? So the planet Lygon 2 has a vaccine for a plague that is causing serious harm in the Federation. And so Picard must negotiate for an exchange with a leader who's more interested in ritual kidnapping than political negotiations. Dun dun dun. So there's our setup for this episode. We have to get the vaccine for a plague, but the person we're working with is not the easiest leader to interface and negotiate with of all time. So I'm going to put this one squarely in an action thriller. Basically, the climax is a one-on-one fight to the death, and technically someone does die. Technically,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of makes it underwhelming since it's a technical death and not an actual death. But hey, whatever. And what are some tropes that are going? Some big sci-fi tropes that are going down. You got the diabolical plague. The plague that's ravaging everyone. You have a monoracial species. So basically, everyone that we see on the planet, all the natives are black, but I'm not sure if they don't actually discuss that or why or yeah, there's no actual
Nope.
investigation to just what we see. And honestly, I would say that this really hits on some maybe even black exploitation stereotypes about black men, stereotypes about black people, told through the direction of a white production staff. So, yeah, I think this one's got all sorts of historical tropes that are problematic, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
definitely talk about that when we get into the deep cuts. So, yeah, let's take it that way right now and start talking about what works, if anything, from this very problematic episode.
There are two things that work from my perspective for the benefit of the greater franchise. Picard is slowly established as a diplomat instead of a hard-nosed captain. You take a look, especially at Encounter at Farpoint. Picard is very much by the numbers, very much a hard-nosed, hard case kind of guy, taskmaster, all those sorts of things. Softens maybe a little bit on account of the Psi 2000 virus and Naked Now, but in this episode, Picard is slowly established as a diplomat. There are certain points in which you think, given the precedent of the first two episodes, Picard might lose his cool or Picard might be careless. There's a scene that jumps to mind where Data corrects Picard on the age of the gift, the porcelain gift, which I have words for later on. That you want to talk about budget. There's where the budget went to the dollar store things. But under normal circumstances, given what you know about the character up until that point, Picard could have jumped on Data's case. He doesn't. And the dialogues where he's down on the planet, he emphasizes more diplomacy than aggression, which does benefit his character and does set a foundation for how he handles those strange new worlds that he comes across very often in the show. Another thing that I think works is Yar is fully established as a strong female character. Almost everything about her character is in focus, which I kind of think is odd because, at risk of spoiling a show that's 35 years old almost, Denise Crosby did not feel serviced as an actress and therefore asked for her character to be written off, which does happen later on in the season, but which is kind of ironic because her character is the most defined in the first three episodes. You see why she does what she does, and now you in previous episodes, now you see the how. She can hold her own in a fight against pretty much anybody, and that definitely informs her character. Unfortunately, it's maybe that development was premature because they didn't know what to do with her afterwards. Um, our resident scholar, what works in this episode for you?
Yeah, I want to agree with you on the work that Picard does as a character. I think that's really important. Picard has to see things through a different cultural lens, right? Picard is able to honor the customs on Ligon 2, as unsympathetic as they are, the ritual kidnapping, which we'll get to when we talk about what doesn't work. But he's able to honor the customs of a sovereign planet while saving the life of one of his crew members and saving the life of a member of a planet they just made. Did they just make first contact with this planet, actually? Is this a first contact episode? Did I miss that trope in the
I
beginning?
rewatched this episode right before we filmed. I think maybe second contact. I
Maybe,
think they
yeah.
know, but relations are not formally solidified, as
So
evidenced by sorry,
no,
as
as
evidenced by the "you shall have no treaty, no vaccine, no YAR" line. I think they're in the process of establishing diplomatic ties, but maybe not first contact.
So yeah, regardless if it's first or second, though, I feel like he does a pretty good job with limited exposure to this planet, with limited knowledge about it. And yeah, they're able to honor Picard's character. And if anything works, it's his attempt to cross those cultural lines while still honoring them. So yeah, I just want to echo that point that you make about Picard and what he has to go through and how his character is defined in this episode. So, yeah, that's a pretty brief list of what works. I think it's time probably now to take a dive into what doesn't work. Um, I know you want to say everything else. So let's just start with that. What is everything else there? Let's talk about that.
So my first reaction of this, and I tried to be witty and quippy, is this episode's only purpose now, especially given our political and cultural climate, is to show at diversity trainings as examples of what might constitute microaggressions.
Oh
There
yeah.
is something in here to offend just about everybody. Women, people of color, indigenous people, even the French get their lickings in this episode. Data says something to the effect of ancient and primitive French people, and Picard takes offense to that by virtue of the fact that he is a a French person, and a British actor playing a French person. Go figure.
Who forgets he's French multiple times. Let's just say it.
Yeah. So with that in mind, also notice Worf isn't present in this episode.
Mm.
That's something to point out. Read into that as deeply as you'd like. So that was my first reaction. The second reaction that I have is this is because I teach psychology and coming at this from a psychological approach. This is a careless use of archetypes. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with that term, an archetype is a behavioral pattern that allows humans to almost instantly size up deeper meanings behind actions and objects, and in this case, characters. I actually sell a product that talks about how archetypes are used in film on my Teachers Pay Teachers store, Monokoi Enterprises. With that in mind, because of the very specific cultures being referenced, it does something else too called priming, which is where you are pairing a deeper message to a stimulus or archetype. And there are so many things being primed here. Sexist things, racist things, and given your notes are bigger than mine on this, I wanted to hand this over to you, our resident scholar, so you can expand on that.
Yeah, let's talk about one of those. And I also want to add that when I was teaching language arts, especially around the Native American mascot issue, we really looked at the effect that harmful stereotypes have. And I'd ask the kids and I'd challenge them, hey, do you think stereotypes actually could kill or physically harm someone? And at the beginning, stereotype. It's just like, just a cliche about someone, right? Nah, we actually looked at a lot of evidence where there is an increased amount of self-harm among indigenous youth who go to a school or are affiliated with an institution with a Native American mascot that's cast as a warrior or in some sort of aggressive light. So no, honestly, I think what's really important to start out with and talk about this episode is that there are some harmful stereotypes in here that really could do harm to people. And
Hmm.
I want to go back, and I want to go to the first one, which is pretty much a hypersexualized black male. So basically, I'm thinking that this stereotype goes all the way back to, Birth of a Nation, that
Yeah.
really racist film. I can see the scene in my head where there's a young white woman kind of like sitting, minding her own business, and then a male in blackface comes and attacks her. It's a silent film, so there's probably even a title card with some insinuation on there. Haven't seen Birth of a Nation since college when I had to watch it in film class. So it's been a minute. I don't really plan on going back and revisiting that one anytime soon either. And then I was also thinking of how this stereotype shows up in politics. I was thinking
Yeah.
of that super predator George H.W. Bush ad, the Willie Horton ad that he played when he was going against Michael Dukakis. Again, just seizing on this stereotype of black men with aggression that want to harm white women, or white people. Just pretty diabolical. It's definitely been brought out over and over and over again. And it really does some real harm. When you talked about priming, I'm
Hmm.
sure this, there was some connection between that and audience reactions. I'm sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought there, but I just feel like there's definitely some connection between those stereotypes, what the audience is getting out, and harm that this can do to folks, especially black men of color. Any thoughts on that, Captain? On other stereotypes that we see, or on that stereotype before we kind of move on to maybe how the premise fails a little bit too?
Well, the just getting deeper into this, there are a lot of things that when you take into account the demographics of the people involved, um, specifically white individuals, Roddenberry, and that other gentleman whose name is Mayberry. There was an accepted level because of the context that you pointed out in the terms of the media. People in that position, from that perspective, played really fast and loose with cultural appropriation. In some cases, it's more perhaps innocent or benevolent. I was thinking about this when I was watching this. This episode, and as a historian, I had to examine this from this perspective. This episode was made on Paramount around the same time the Eddie Murphy movie Coming to America
Oh,
was being
wow.
filmed. Yes. And I had a theory, but nothing backs this up. So this is a theory and nothing else. Star Trek has a reputation, especially during the original series era, of borrowing costumes and props from other
Oh, yeah.
productions. So my theory was because they cut $3 million from the production budget, they borrowed materials from Coming to America, and that's why the actors happen to be from that demographic. I
Got it.
think I'm wrong
Wow.
on that. But in the broader perspective of things, you have this spectrum in which Hollywood thinks that it's attempting to approach issues of issues pertaining to people of color. So you got Coming to America, which is one of my favorite movies. Beautiful cast, legendary cast, beautiful story, biting social satire. And on the other hand, you have the 1986 movie called Soul Man. Are you familiar with that, Scholar Beta?
I know, yeah, I know of it. I know
Oh,
of it.
okay, so with that in mind, you have a person who wants to get into an Ivy League school who happens to be white, and he intentionally changes the pigment of his skin to qualify for basically an historically black college or university adjacent scholarship. So that clearly, and an interesting thing, because we're both sci-fi aficionados, is C. Thomas Howell, who plays the titular character.
Mm.
First choice for Marty McFly. So
Whoa,
yeah,
nice.
So you have that perspective, you have that era in terms of that concept in terms of Hollywood attempting to do an homage, if you want to do it that way, or whatever. There are some lines in here where they're attempting to say humanity at large has grown past this, so maybe there's good intentions there. But when you take into account that intent versus impact dynamic that we're exploring now, it doesn't
Yeah.
age very well. So that's all I have to say about that. And in terms of the Coming to America Soul Man spectrum, this episode clearly is closer to Soul Man than it is Coming to America.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's go back to that premise for just a second and talk about, where does these kind of stereotypes fit in with this story? So we know that there's a plague going on somewhere in the Federation. We know the Federation needs to come to this planet to get the vaccine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's this strange setup already. So on this planet, right, we have men who are in the ruling class, but women are property owners. Because
Mm-hmm.
actually, how this episode it pans out, even though Luton captures Yar, and that's basically acts, 3, 4, and 5, trying to get Yar back. Luton actually does. It's revealed at the very end that this is all just some sort of political machination, so that Luton can have access to the land that his former first wife was in charge of. So it's all just some sort of giant political kind of land ownership coup almost.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of really convoluted to put that in there. So I guess a couple things I want to say about this is that also involved in this culture where men are the rulers but women are the landowners, there's this planet-wide practice of ritual kidnapping, which I just think is, how do you become a spacefaring civilization when potentially your scientists could get kidnapped, or your engineers could get kidnapped, or your shuttlecraft pilots could be, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I scratch my head a little bit thinking about taking this idea and extrapolating it to a planet-wide culture. That's really interesting to me. So I just have
Yeah.
such a hard time believing this premise. Like, is there no other way for the Federation to acquire this vaccine? Could they not
Mm-hmm.
have done a little more stealth, use some type of duck blind operation like they're going to use in Who Watches the Watchers,
Yeah.
something to preserve the Prime Directive? And did they not do it? I asked about the first contact, because if this is second contact, did they not know about this sort of, kidnapping practice? Was that not in their first report? I don't know. What do you think about that?
In defense, because I did see those scenes that you were talking about,
Yeah,
the kidnapping tradition, it's implied, especially with the combat, that it's seldom used.
got it. Yeah.
The fight to the death that happens at the end of the episode is seldom used. Um, but I absolutely agree with you. They could have used other stealth approaches. Um, there is, in terms of beta canon, there is a novel called Dark Mirror, which is a next generation era mirror universe book, and they go
Awesome.
about it completely differently than Picard does in here in this episode. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where there are better ways of doing it. A good friend of mine coined the phrase to me, idiot plot, where the plot could be summarized or resolved very effectively if the characters involved weren't idiots. And this is definitely a contender for idiot plot. Maybe that should be an award in and of itself. So,
Yeah.
with that in mind, yes.
Okay. And one last thing on this, and one last thing. I know we can harp on this one for a long time,
Oh
but
yeah.
I just want to point out that this is episode 3. No, technically 4. I'm sorry. And Wesley's flying the ship. So I'm watching Wesley. You know me. I'm watching Wesley in this rewatching a retrospective of TNG, and Wesley's flying the ship on episode 4. That by episode 4, I'm just kind of amazed by that. We'll talk more about that when we get to Where No One Has Gone Before.
Yeah.
How much time they're giving Wesley, but wow, I've kind of forgot about that. So yeah, I just want to wrap my comments up by saying, bottom line, I just think there's some lazy writing. The premise is lazy. I think some lazy writing. The stereotypes are harmful.
Oh yeah.
The implications of a planet where everyone's the same race, not explored at all, could have been done, could be interesting, but nothing there investigated by the writer. So yeah, just some kind of lazy and kind of some shallow writing going on.
Well, partially, and I need to do a deeper dive on this. There were 30 writers in season one. People,
Whoa.
yes, people were getting hired and fired. There was a higher turnover than a really bad McDonald's. So
Wow. Yes.
yeah, there were literally 30 writers. I did that research over the weekend. So yeah, definitely disjointed. Now, before we beam out here, according to the ship's clock, we got 6 minutes on this before we get beamed out. So, Trek's first and facts. When Star Trek turned 50 years old, the 2016 Star Trek Las Vegas convention. I've never been. I'd love to go one of these times, but they had a poll in which attendees ranked the very best and the very worst episodes ever. And Code of Honor ranked second worst out of all the episodes in Star Trek. The first one was These Are the Voyages, the Enterprise semi-finale. I think Code of Honor is worse. I get it for devotees of Enterprise how mismanaged that finale was, but at least they didn't. At least it's harmful in the sense of telling a story and not something broader and cultural. That's why, from my perspective, being Hispanic, Latino, Italian, there are many different stereotypes that come up that it's like, yeah, okay, that's not so good. So in my perspective, it's worse. Jonathan Frakes has recently gone on record, I think just over the summer, and refers to this episode as a racist POS.
Yeah.
You can figure out what that acronym means, and reportedly tried to get it pulled from broadcast when it was aired in 1987.
Yeah. Hey, any idea where Shades of Grey ranked on that top 50 or I mean, you're ranking all the best and worst?
I'd have to guess that it was third or fourth.
Is that even an episode technically?
Oh, that's good. That is really good.
Yeah, maybe someday we get there. Maybe the Captain's Yacht takes us past a tour of that horrible clip show. But
well, okay,
hey, that's for another day, I guess.
We will examine that one in greater detail, and examining that story might take 15 minutes. That episode, because there were very specific things that happened in that episode that made it many different external factors that made that episode what it was. I don't blame that episode. I blame the outside factors that caused that to happen. But I agree, on the surface, it's a cheap clip show.
Do we got time to talk about awards before we move on, right?
Oh, yeah.
Surely.
Yeah. So with that in mind, we have the Dollar Tree Award. The Dollar Tree Award is in recognition of something done on the cheap. And this makes me laugh. It is done on the cheap because you see so after the opening credits, you have Data coming in with this porcelain Chinese gift, allegedly.
Yes.
And it's done up with such fanfare, like it's this precious object. And in reality, this horse looks like something that you would get at a farm supply store like Big R or Coastal Farm and Ranch. It doesn't look porcelain. It doesn't look like it comes from the culture they say it does. Oh my gosh, just cheap. Yes.
Yeah, take a look at our Enterprise interior for the episode, because that is the conference room, main conference room behind the bridge. And yeah, there it is where Picard is greeting his I guess where Luton, and company, and there's that really nice horse, right there in the bottom left. Wow, yeah, that is an amazing gift. I wish I had that, honestly. So yeah, I'm gonna give my award for Enterprise interior to the main conference room, simply because it is the host of the meeting where that crappy horse is exchanged, and I love it. Hey, really quickly with the time I got left, I just want to give a salute to a matte painting as well. Luton Center Place. Man, I love that temple-esque design of that building, of that structure, and then the valley. And over there on the right side of the image, you can see some kind of some dwellings over there. I just
Hmm.
think that's a really cool map painting, I think it worked really nicely
Oh
as
yeah,
well. So just
I
really want to give a shout out to that, especially when there is a map painting. Got to give a shout out to it.
you definitely do. We are getting close to beam out. Before we get to our beam out point, real quick, there is a new challenge that I wanted to throw out. It's a variation of the Naked Now plot twist challenge that we talked about. This particular challenge deals with rewriting the whole episode. How would we very quickly take the general, extremely broad plot points of this episode and make our own version of it that is light years less offensive? We don't have the time to do it now, but if there is interest in that, please let us know. Maybe we can make a special episode about it, or if we get to that point, Patreon, and we can make that a Patreon bonus. I have a couple other episodes that could qualify for the ultimate plot twist challenge. So, with that in mind, we are 1 minute away from beam out. Scholar Beta, do you have anything before we get beamed out?
You know, you just thinking about this episode, honestly think this is a very important discussion to have, especially with students. I think it's very easy to throw around the word racist in a discussion of art. And I think it's a good exercise, myself as a white teacher, to model discussing what elements are problematic,
Mm-hmm.
are harmful, why the work becomes racist, or how a work becomes racist, an inanimate object. I think that's just a fascinating discussion that we don't have in school nearly as much as we should. And I think it's because it could hurt the teachers' feelings sometimes because the work they're bringing forward. It could hurt the students' feelings sometimes because
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're a big fan of the franchise or the work that we're looking at. So it's a difficult conversation to have, but an incredibly important one and a nuanced one. And Catherine, I'm glad we could have this discussion. By no means did we solve, racism in Star Trek, but I think this is a good discussion or a good beginning of a discussion on some of the problematic aspects in one of our favorite shows. It's okay for us to love this thing and remain critical of it at the same time. I think that's something we really have to model. Any
Definitely,
final
and
words for me, my friend?
I think so, and we're about ready for beam out. This concludes the light version of this episode. On behalf of Scholar Beta, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned for deluxe versions of this episode, in which video footage will be interspliced with our commentary to enhance our podcast experience. With all that said, thank you very much for the support. Any feedback you give is appreciated because it helps the kids. And with that said, live long and prosper. E malama pono, and we'll see you next time.